Everyone, this is our last video lecture material. I'm gonna try and record another video. We're sort of pressed for time here, so this is gonna be a little condensed. This is gonna be a short one. So this may not be the last. There will be another one after this, but in this we're gonna go through Simone de Beauvoir's Ethics of Ambiguity, chapter 3. We'll see how far we get into chapter 3, and the next video we'll finish up anything we didn't cover and talk about the conclusion. And then I also want to give you guys some kind of conclusion to the whole semester, try and wrap up the themes that we've covered, at least to some extent. So this is going to focus just on ethics of ambiguity. So we saw in chapters 1 and 2, right, the basic approach of existentialism. Right? We discussed the central existentialist idea that existence precedes essence, right? That existence is inherently ambiguous, in the sense that there is no absolute value to existence, and that any attempt to give existence an absolute value is going to conceal the ambiguity of existence. And so for de Beauvoir, what this means is that all systems of ethics that imply a system of practice, system of behavior based on that value are fallacious. Right? That systems of ethics always reduce being to a set of values illegitimately. Being has no inherent value, existence has no inherent value, and therefore any system of ethics is going to be based on, if not opinion, then at least sort of an arbitrary decision of what is value. There are no universal values. Every individual decides value for themselves. Right? Every individual decides the meaning of their own life, and is in an individual's self-realization, an individual's willing their own freedom, to use the important phrase in this book, that life means meaning. Right? It's only when I'm able to recognize myself as free and use that freedom to determine myself that my life has any real value or meaning. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that you have to completely invent yourself or be completely unique in order to have meaning. It's about our decisions as free individuals that construct the meaning of our lives. Right? It's, it doesn't mean you have to be a genius inventor or artist in order to be existentially meaningful. The meaning of everyone's life is always already determined existentially by the free choices that individuals make, for de Beauvoir. That's the essential idea, right? This willing oneself free, and in that process of becoming oneself, one's life finds meaning. So in chapter 3, de Beauvoir is developing this and thinking about this existentialist idea in terms of the real world a little bit more. And we get in chapter 3 these 5 sections where she's sort of gaming out this existentialist idea in different contexts. And the first section, so chapter 3, is the positive aspect of ambiguity. And the first section is the aesthetic attitude. Right? And in this section, she is talking about aesthetics and art as expressions of freedom. And what she's really setting up here, seems to me, is the role of the artist and the position of the artist. And the artist for de Beauvoir represents a kind of alternative to the ethicist. The ethicist is the one who argues for an absolute value in existence, who right, wants to impose some kind of system on existence. Right? And this is an attitude that de Beauvoir identifies with the quote-unquote serious person, right? The serious person who believes there is an absolute value to life, that there is a correct way of being, and that there's a system of ethics that everyone universally should follow. So the serious person is the politician, the lawyer, the religious person, anyone who is committed to a particular interpretation of being. And the artist represents an alternative to this, because the artist is not tied to any system of value, but finds value through creation. Right? What is created is not important. It is the fact of creation that gives meaning to the product, right? So the artist doesn't matter what they take as their subject matter, as the content of their painting, let's say. What matters is the representation of that, the creation of that in art through one's own lens, through one's own mind and creation, right? So, the value of the water lilies sitting in the pond near Monet are, without sort of inherent value, in the sense that no one would put the water lilies themselves in a museum. Hi, Robert. So, right, the water lilies in themselves don't have value. It's only when they are mediated through Monet, right, when they are turned into a work of art, that they're given value. So in that sense, the artist works in a world that is devoid of meaning, and in which meaning is imbued in the world through creation. And in that sense, the artist is an existentialist, right? Because it is only through creation that things have meaning. And that's the general sort of attitude and framework that de Beauvoir wants to develop, right? The sort of idea of the artist. But the artist is a unique case. Right? And what she's more interested in is ethics, right? How can we apply sort of that attitude of the artist, which is the existentialist attitude, to questions of ethics, to questions of what we ought to do, of right and wrong? Can we be artists about ethics? Right? Can we, base our decisions and our behavior on, our own values and our own desires, our own whims, in some cases? How is that going to work? So this gets us to one of the main objections and problems with existentialism. And that is that existentialism is, has the potential to be a philosophy of selfishness. And we see Beauvoir addressing this through the question of individualism. And we'll circle back to that later. But for now, how can existentialism have an ethics if existentialism, in some sense, tells us that we are free to be and do whatever we like? That sounds like the opposite of ethics. Right? Do whatever you want. There are no absolute values. There are no objective moral laws or anything like that. Well, how can we have an existentialist ethics then? And the answer is going to be that for de Beauvoir, and this is true for other existentialists, also certainly for Sartre, an existentialist ethics is going to be based in freedom and in liberation, where while there won't be kind of system of ethics in the sense of Aristotle's system of ethics, right? Always look for the moderate thing. Always look for the mean, right? Justice is the mean, and there's a kind of operation that you can run in order to determine what the ethical act will be. That's a gross simplification of Aristotelian ethics, but maybe the utilitarian model would be better, right? There's a set operation that you perform, right? What will create the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people? It's an equation, and you plug in the variables and you figure it out. For our end, there will be nothing like that. Ethics can't be systematized and formalized in that way, but there will be a kind of guideline for ethical behavior and for what creates the conditions for the possibility of ethics, right? For the possibility of human existence, really. The ethics of ambiguity, the ethics of existentialism, will be a humanist ethics. Sartre has an essay that, if you're interested in this, I recommend. It's not too difficult to read, called Existentialism is a Humanism. I may have mentioned it in the last lecture also, where he outlines many similar points. So to say that existentialism, existential ethics are humanistic ethics is to say that for de Beauvoir, for existentialism, what is ethical is that which increases human freedom and human liberation. And what is ethical is that which maintains and cultivates the conditions for human existence, where human existence is defined as freedom, right? Freedom to determine one's own future, specifically. So while there is no moral law, there is this guideline, right? Whatever increases human freedom is ethical. Whatever decreases human freedom is unethical. So on page 84, Freedom and Liberation, section 2, de Beauvoir is going to get into this in some more detail. The way that my own freedom is predicated on other people's freedom, and that whenever I use my freedom to harm someone else or to specifically decrease someone else's freedom, then I'm also harming my freedom. And so, I think there are a number of connections to other ethical theories here. And I don't want to spend too long on it, but we can see connections to um, not just utilitarianism, but also Kantianism here, with the idea that uh, I am free to pursue my own ends, so long as those ends never harm anyone else, right? And harming someone else would be a way of decreasing their freedom, their powers, their capabilities. And in that, right, de Beauvoir is going Mill's harm principle. I am free up to the point where my freedom impinges on someone else's freedom. And also, I think we see a connection to Kant and a certain conception of the universality of human reason. But now the universal term is not reason, but freedom, right? And so what is ethical is that which treats all human beings as free agents, as people who have the right to determine their own future. And any action that prevents people from determining their own future is an unethical act. And so that's going to be, basically a one-to-one correlation with Kant's conception, but with the idea of the rational agent being replaced with the, free agent, right? The free subjectivity. So to never treat people as only means to one's own ends. That is, I think you could say a different articulation of this existentialist ethics, insofar as it allows others to pursue their own freedom. Now, de Beauvoir is going to have a different concept of freedom and of reason than Kant, but in terms of structure, in terms of principles, I think there's a correlation to be made to Kant. So the main argument for this is that my freedom is dependent on other people's freedom, and that while others are unfree, I am also less free. And we see this first start to crop up on page 91, where she says, all men are interested in this elimination, the elimination of oppression, of the elimination of freedom. Right? All men are interested in this elimination of oppression. The oppressor as well as the oppressed, as Marx himself said, for each one needs to have all men free. So this is, an interesting point, that a system of oppression is detrimental to the freedom not just of the oppressed, but also of the oppressor. Right? A system of oppression entraps both oppressor and oppressed within it, and it limits the possibilities of their being. Right, the oppressor must continue to oppress in order to maintain that role, and obviously the oppressed is denied freedom. So, right, the relation of oppressor to oppressed overdetermines even the oppressor. Right? The oppressor closes themselves off to their own humanity by forcing themselves into this role. And that is one way in which their own freedom is hindered by this oppression. We could then also add to that, right, that the violence that one does to someone else is also a kind of violence against oneself. I think there are sort of overtones of that. But on 97, we get a more complete articulation of this. At the bottom of that page, de Beauvoir writes, "It is not true that the recognition of the freedom of others limits my own freedom. It is not true that the recognition of the freedom of others limits my own freedom. Um, my own freedom is never limited by someone else's freedom. I never lose freedom by granting freedom to someone else. Um, to be free is not to have the power to do anything you like. It is to be able to surpass the given toward an open future. So to be free is not to have the power to do anything you like. Freedom does not mean doing whatever you want. Freedom is the ability to explore all of your inner possibilities as a person. It is not to do anything in the sense of hurt other people, exploit other people, deny other people their freedom, refuse to recognize other people as human, right? Freedom is to be able to surpass the given world toward an open future. Freedom consists in the ability to change the world. Freedom consists in the ability to become something other than what you are, to create a world that is different from the one you're born into. That is true freedom. And that kind of freedom relies on the freedom of other people. Right? The freedom of other people to allow you to be what you are, and to recognize the possibility of another world, another you, etc. So this is a really important distinction and definition of freedom. Right? Freedom is the ability, it's nicely articulated, to surpass the given. Right? Kant makes a distinction between the is and the ought. Right? What is not what ought to be. And what ought to be is not simply what is. Freedom is the ability to imagine what ought to be based on what is. I see the world as it is, and I imagine a different world. I think about how things ought to be. And freedom is the ability to surpass what is in the attempt to achieve what ought to be. So any understanding of freedom as merely the right to do whatever you like doesn't grasp freedom in its essence, in its deepest meaning. And at that deeper level, the freedom to surpass what is, the given. Right? Freedom is a collective experience. It requires the freedom of all people in order to recognize the potential to surpass what is, to think about alternatives to what is. She goes on, the existence of others as a freedom defines my situation and is even the condition of my own freedom. I am oppressed. Well, let's go over that again. So the existence of others as a freedom defines my situation and is even the condition of my own freedom. Right? So I'm only able to be free in this important sense, this deeper sense, because of this collective freedom that we have. Right? If I propose a new world, if I imagine that we might become something else, I'm only able to work toward that, to enact that freedom, if everyone else around me has the freedom also to recognize the possibility of this alternative, of working toward it. And so true freedom activates the collective freedom of human being. Right? When I act freely, I'm able to do that. I'm able to do so. I'm allowed to do so because everyone else has that same capacity to act freely. And this is also, how inspiration works, right, to some extent. See someone do something new, right? Surpass the given, surpass the world. And one realizes that one also has the freedom to do that. And so the relationship between, in Aristotle, for example, the exemplar, the person that demonstrates virtue, and the person that then learns virtue from the one who demonstrates it, is possible because of this inherent freedom that all people have. So I think this is an interesting argument. And she goes on, right? I am oppressed if I am thrown into prison, but not if I am kept from throwing my neighbor into prison. So this is, I think, a really important distinction about what is freedom and what is not freedom, and relevant to our moment, right, where we often hear claims of oppression from, every corner and every side. Everyone feels oppressed. Arendt is saying, not every instance of preventing someone from doing something that they want to do is an instance of oppression. Just because you want to do it and someone says you can't do that doesn't mean that you're oppressed. Right? Oppression is the denial of this deeper freedom, the freedom to become the thing that you imagine. It is not oppression to be prevented from oppressing someone else. And so I guess the debate this reminds me of is the debate about the tolerant left. I don't know if you've heard this, right? But when someone says, oh, these college leftists won't let a Nazi come speak on campus, right? Oh, the tolerant left won't, tolerate Nazi opinions, right? They're censoring the Nazis, and right, obviously, there's nuance to this in cases, but this is clearly on one side, someone is trying to prevent someone else from propagating oppressive ideas. To prevent the propagation of oppression is not oppression. To prevent the propagation of oppression is to promote freedom. Yeah. All right, so let's, I've got to go teach another class, but I will be back to wrap up Ethics of Ambiguity later today. But that's all for this moment.